Okay, so this is a video for after 58 minutes of the documentary. So at this point, in this last section after the 29-minute mark, he's kind of showing you more diverse, ways that we see capitalism take place in America and how it affects people in many ways. So it's not just about people losing their jobs and people losing their homes like he kind of showed us, and it's bigger than the understanding capitalism as an economic system. It affects people in other ways, right? So he starts with talking to us a little bit about P.A Childcare, not AP. And he explains how these kids were getting sent to juvie for very minor reasons, right? And that this detention center that they were being sent to was funded by taxpayer dollars, as our jails are, like all prison systems are. But that the system that they were being sent to was private and not public. So what this means is that a man, I think it was Powell, comes out and he buys out the juvenile detention center. And he sets to run it as a private organization, but run on public funds, on taxpayer dollars. So he basically bills the state and says, hey, I need this much money to run the entire establishment. He tells how much money he needs, and then they bill it out. But again, that's taxpayer dollars that fund that. So what he ended up doing is being pretty fraudulent in the way that he was asking for this money. And he was saying that, hypothetically, random numbers, it costs $20 a day per child to run the place, whereas maybe it only costs $10. So he'd ask the state for that much money and they would give it to him. So he was now making $10 a day off having heads in the building, off having kids locked up. So then obviously his motivation is, if I'm making money off of them being here, I want a ton of people here. So he went to the judges and said, okay, send me as many of these kids, lock them up for as long as you can, and I will line your pocket. I'll give you a little money for your troubles. So now he corrupted the justice system to send him kids, and then he would send them money. And it was kind of a vicious cycle that continued. So eventually that got found out. But clearly what was happening here is he was profiting, capitalizing off these kids getting locked up. So, the big guys up there that are making money, these businessmen, these bankers, the government even, they don't care about the little people. And this is clearly an example of that, right? And then he pivots to the example of pilots. So when he's talking about the pilots, he's explaining to us about how these pilots are, number one, underpaid. The one example was a woman who was paid $19,000 in a year, and yet she has over $100,000 of school debt. So, money that she loaned and took out so that she could pay for her schooling. And so she even says by the time she pays it off, with late fees and penalties and interest that happens when you take out loans, it's going to be $500,000. So you have to think about it that way. I mean, she's getting paid so little, and a lot of that money has to be used for living, to pay for a house and for food and, life expenses, healthcare and stuff. So how much left over does she have every year to pay off her debts? Not much. And so they were explaining all these pilots who are underpaid because the companies want to try and save money. They don't want to overpay their pilots. Now, their other way that they're able to save money is by skimping on costs. So what does an airline is, think of it as like a car owner. They have expenses. So how can they save money on expenses? Well, us naturally, one of the things that we, have to spend money on, which sucks, is oil changes on our cars and whatever. It's the same thing for airlines. American Airlines has maybe, I don't know how many, but say 20,000 planes. So they have to pay for an oil change, a checkup on their cars, their planes, every month. That's part of the regulations for planes to make sure they're safe. So they're kind of going, well, if I'm going to pay for that every month for every plane, that's a lot of money. So what they end up doing is they skimp on the costs and they skip a check. And that's where these planes start to develop issues. So they gave the example of that one plane that went down, and the media tried to blame the pilot, saying it was the pilot's fault because they don't want it to come out that the companies are trying to be, greedy and save money. So they cover it up. So they're literally killing people by being greedy, right? These planes go down. So that's another example of the greed there and how they're capitalizing off other people. And then the last one, which is probably the most frustrating, is the Dead Peasant insurance. So you have to kind of understand a little bit of how life insurance works. But basically what it is you take out a policy and you pay in every month, kind of like we do on our phones now. You pay like insurance on your phone, and they pay every month for insurance on their life. And if you die, your benefactors, so your beneficiaries, the people that are your family, your dependents, whatever, they get to collect that money. So for instance, if I were married now and I had children, I would pay into a policy. And if I died, my husband would get all that money that I paid into. So the way it works is you pay a little bit every month for a certain amount of the policy. It's called a premium. So hypothetically, I wouldn't give my numbers, but let's say hypothetically I paid $18 a month right now for a $400,000 policy. So I've been teaching for just over 4 years. It's my 5th year now. So I've paid $18 a month, hypothetically, for those 4 years. Now, it's not even close to $400,000. But if I die tomorrow, my family will still get that $400,000. So you basically pay it as a kind of a fee to have access to that money in case you die. Now, what ended up happening is these companies were taking out policies on their employees, which is wholly illegal because when you take out life insurance on yourself, you don't want to die, right? And your family doesn't want you to die. But this company wants their employees to die because they want to collect that money. So they're secretly taking out these policies on their employees and then collecting the check when their employees died. And so Irma, the one wife, found out about Bank of America taking one out on her husband by total accident. They sent her the slip that said we've collected the money, and they didn't mean to do that. They should have sent it to themselves. So they screwed up. So they're literally making money off their employees dying. Like, how obvious is it that they don't care about the little people, right? That's capitalism, okay? And so he pivots it now to talking to these priests and pastors and respected religious men, and asking them, is it a sin? Now that's really smart of Michael Moore, because what he's doing is he's appealing to the values of most Americans, that they're very religious, and appealing to their values and saying, if we care about religion, we care what's right and wrong. Well, look at all these priests that are telling us capitalism is wrong. So, what better to explain his point? And of course, they go through how, capitalism is, built on propaganda, and that the way to get people to not fight back, because it's like he said, they're 99% and the 1% is the rich people that are doing all of this. So obviously the 99% can overthrow the 1%, right? And they could take back the power and not allow these things to happen. But the way that they are controlled is that the propagandists and the capitalists that use the propaganda, because they have tools of themselves, are telling the little people that this is the American dream. If you work hard, you'll be able to be successful. But that's not necessarily the case. What we're seeing with these people at their homes and the companies and the people who work several jobs, like the pilots, no matter what they do, they're not living the American dream. They're working so hard, but they're still being taken advantage of by these banks. So by using propaganda, and he kind of shows like the hypnotism and whatever, they're convincing people into thinking that you will be able to achieve this success by continue working. And so, the metaphor he uses is the dog jumping to try and get the food on the table. That's the American people working, trying hard to be successful, to be stable even financially. And no matter what, they keep getting kind of knocked down by the system, by banks, by government, by their bosses, by businessmen, whatever. So what so far Michael Moore has told us is that capitalism is people who are powerful, who use their power to, basically take control of other people and make more money, the little people. And so what it does is it makes the powerful people more powerful and more rich, and the people that are lower financially, less stable, and they have less power. So he's really trying to expose how much American people have been abused by their government, by their banks, by their bosses, and whatnot. And that's really all he's given us so far. So now the next bit, and I'll pause it here, he's going to pivot to how it's really affected the 2008 market crash. So that's when it gets kind of complex. But what he's trying to show you so far is that capitalism started good. It became corrupted because people wanted to make money and they realized there was a room to make money. And then it started to all these examples of how can we make money in other ways, even if we don't care if it hurts people. And that's what these last examples have been. Now he's going to pivot to when was capitalism really problematic. And that's what the 2008 crash is. So I'll pause it here and I'll let you continue watching.